So without further ado, I am now going to introduce you to our special guest today, who is Guy Lloyd, Director of the Institute of Sales Professionals. Now, not only that, Guy has been leading sales teams for over 30 years, and he has experience of managing sales, operations, and delivery in large and small tech firms. So he's got a real breadth of experience right across the UK, Europe, and other worldwide geographies. He has extensive knowledge of the IT industry across software, services, and hardware, which is really, really helpful because selling sometimes services is quite different to selling hardware and things that you can touch and see and feel. And with several years living and working in the USA and Switzerland, he really does have some fantastic experience to share with us today. I'm sure it'll come across today, but Guy's a passionate believer in the sales profession and developing sales talent. He is a founding member, indeed, of the Institute of Sales Professionals, where he is a board director now and a trustee, working closely with the UK government to gain better support for the profession and those entering into it. And he's committed to supporting SMEs to improve their selling performance. So without further ado, Guy, welcome. Are you there? Brilliant. Nice to see you, Guy. And I really do want to thank you in participating as part of the campaign and giving up your time. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you if that's okay.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks, Nikki. Thank you for the introduction. Okay. Do we have the slides up? They do. Brilliant. Okay. So I think we've had the introduction. Let's press on. I've got quite a lot of material to go through. I'll try and keep it as simple as we can, but it's a pretty big subject. But let's first visit why we're here. Sales is a constant challenge, I think, particularly for our small and medium enterprises. There's lots of data to show us that it is, in fact, potentially a top challenge. Tech UK is a membership organisation for technical companies, a number of large tech companies, but also about 500 SME members. And they do a annual survey of members and some interesting data points. The top challenge cited came up 45% of the time was customer acquisition sales. And interestingly, the next challenge, this was actually a couple of years ago, so this is pre all the current challenges we have with inflation. But the next challenge then was 26% of the time. Another interesting data point, for example, is that, and we'll be touching on this, is qualified opportunities or the lack of qualified opportunities actually closing. So one of the big challenges in sales is we spend a lot of time working on deals, working on opportunities that don't actually close. And why is that? And addressing that issue is one of the big areas of productivity improvement. We'll come into that. And this really supports it's another data point, but it really supports the previous bullet, which is that a 2/3 of sales are lost as a result of the reps not properly qualifying, i.e., does this customer really have a problem that we can solve, and are they actually likely to buy anything from us? Are we wasting our time talking to them and wasting their time by having those conversations? And potentially, a lot of this is also because of fit. We're not actually talking to the customers that have a good fit for what we're offering them, and therefore the selling process is very difficult. Trying to squeeze something into something else that doesn't fit, it's hard work and it's unlikely to be successful. And of course, if we had better skills, some of these problems that I've met on the earlier bullets there would probably not be the case. So most companies say that with better skills, we would actually improve our sales performance. Not really a surprise on that one. So cost of sales. If we can sell more, if our revenue can improve, then obviously, generally, unless we're selling at a loss, our gross profit is going to improve. But what are the things that drag down our profitability? It's the cost of sales. And the cost of sales covers lots of areas. I've listed some there. You'll be familiar with most of those, I would hope. The only one I'm going to focus on is the cost of sales staff, the compensation that you pay your salespeople. The other ones are really to do with the production costs of those items or services that you are selling. So let's focus on the sales activity. So what are the drivers of cost of sales, compensation cost of sales? Well, obviously you've got the base pay of your sellers. You've got their total compensation, so that would be commission and bonuses and spiffs and those type of things that you may be providing to them. How you set quotas, how you allocate opportunity, what sort of attainment levels. So if you're setting OTEs, are your sellers making their on-target earnings? In fact, the stats say that more sellers don't make their OTE than do make their OTE. Why is that? The shape of the pay curve. So this is the relative amount of OTE that is paid relative to their performance. So, for example, if they're earning 120% of their target, does their OTE, is it more than 120% or is it less than 120%? Similarly, if they make half of their target, do they get half of their commission or do they get more or less than that? So the structure, and that can affect your obviously your cost of sales. Crediting rules. So in larger organizations, you'll find that a lot of people may get paid on the same transaction, just to various degrees. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because you do often need, in complex sales, teams and people to work together. But it's something to understand just how much you may be spreading the commission dollars around your organization, and the size of your sales force and and how it's deployed. For those who are interested, the cross-industry benchmark for cost of sales in this space is about 8% of your revenue. Now that's a broad number, and it will vary by industry. And in fact, if you want to look into more of the research, then there's the link there on the bottom, the Alexandra Group. There's some good discussion about cost of sales. So, improving sales effectiveness. I see there's really three ways we can look at improving how effective we are selling. The first one is understanding how you actually engage with the market, so your routes to market. Are you selling through a direct sales force that goes out and sees customers? Are you selling with an inside sales force that is telesales based? So generally less expensive to hire, but probably in a lot of situations less effective in selling, because it is often a personal one-to-one type of discussion. Do you employ resellers so that your burden or your cost of the sales force is reduced, but obviously you're paying them commissions or percentages of the sale? Do you use agents? Do you encourage people to self-serve? So if you're selling something that's well understood and it's more of a commodity, then self-service might be a better way than actually paying salespeople to sell something that your customers may already know how to buy. Probably, most likely, you will have a combination of those things, and trying to get the mix right is something that is ongoing and probably needs to be looked at continuously. The other element of sales effectiveness is your process. What process do you use? How do you actually understand where you are in the sales activity? What's the next thing to do? How do you structure things? And then lastly is skills. Obviously, you may have a great process, but if people don't know how to use it or don't know what the selling activity is, they're going to be ineffective. So those are the three main ingredients you have to work with to improve your sales effectiveness. And let's look at process. So selling is a process, and I say of sorts, because it's both art and science, as we say in the sales game. So here's an example of a sales process, a very simple one. This is from HubSpot. You find a prospect, you qualify the prospect, you do some research, you pitch, you handle some objections, and you close. The reality is that most sales are much more complex than that. From my perspective, you're always qualifying, you're always pitching, and you're always handling objections, and you're always closing. And the reason I say that is because actually to progress a sale, there's a series of micro closes that you need to do to confirm their agreement to continue. So there's a negotiation around that, and then there's a close, and then you move on. If you do that well, you don't have a large number of objections at the back end of the engagement to deal with. In fact, sales process is probably more like this. There's a lot of repeats, things that go wrong. You have to go back and do things. Maybe your key sponsor or the key interested party leaves the company. You have to start again. Maybe your salesperson moves on to another company. So there's lots of things that you have to do. Maybe there's external dynamics that change things. So one day the company is fairly cash rich and they're quite open to spending money. The next day they have a huge inflationary pressure come in and they shut down their spending activities. So it's a very complex activity, and it's one that you need to understand. It is not linear. GIGO or GIGO, we talked about earlier, but that 60% of qualified opportunities end in no decision. Now, why is that? And for me, one of the major elements is if we look at selling as a process, it's the fact that we have poor qualified opportunities come into the process, and therefore they are very hard to close. The customer doesn't really need the product, or it's not a good fit, or the customer's not ready to actually make an investment. So one of the best ways and most effective ways to improve our effectiveness is to make sure that we're only actually working on qualified opportunities. It's the qualified opportunities that will progress quickly through a sales process, probably close for higher value, whereas the poorly qualified opportunities will just use your resource. And the most precious resource that a salesperson has is their time. So we really do not want our salespeople focusing on things that are unproductive, because it means they don't have time to focus on the productive activities. Qualification. There are lots of qualification processes out there. I would encourage you all to be familiar with at least one of these. You may have come across BANT, which is budget, authority, need, and timing. I'm not a fan of BANT personally for various reasons. These other ones are all variations of looking at who the stakeholders are, looking at what the need is and timing, etc. But it's important to have a mechanism about how you qualify your opportunities. Is this a opportunity that is worth investing further time on, or is it something we should let go? When you qualify, and every opportunity that comes into you should be qualified, there are three results really, which is it's not qualified, it is qualified, or it's deferred, which means that it looks like it is qualified, but the customer, or for whatever reason, the timing is not good, and we should come back and revisit it in 3 months, 6 months, or something. Having that ability to revisit those opportunities is important, because those are some of your future sales that you make that may be able to win, but you can't win them right now. So another aspect of selling is numbers. A lot of people like to see selling as a numbers game. Purely, the more opportunity I have to work on, the more business I will close. I sometimes describe this as whack-a-mole, in that we are chasing anything and everything that moves. It's exhausting, and we rarely actually make any sort of meaningful impact on things. So this is the lad here who's trying to play the game, and he probably, if he's lucky, he might catch a mole, but he's more likely going to miss every one that comes up, because there's no focus. We don't know what we're chasing or why we're chasing it. Much better to be targeted, know exactly what we're aiming for and why we're aiming for it, and actually be laser focused on that engagement. This is what I call having an ideal customer profile. So what does a really good prospect look like? What is their situation? Why do they have a need? How are you able to service that need? Is that an area that you've worked in before? Do you understand that industry? All those aspects should form your ideal customer profile. And then when you prospect, it's a matter of comparing your opportunity that's presented to you with that ideal customer profile, and being able to say they're a good fit or they're a poor fit. And the poor fits, I would recommend, are declined and not engaged with, and the good fits are worked hard, because it's those good fits that are going to accelerate your business and give you that higher close rate than chasing everything. And to give you an idea of how that might work, here are 2 pipelines. So often people will say, let me just pour as much as I can in the top. The bigger the pipeline, the more I can catch, the more will come out the bottom. That's not actually how it works in complex business sales. And if I show you a concept here of, I have got 14 opportunities, and to close an opportunity, I need to invest what we've got here, 10 units of sales effort. So that's the orange line across the top. So those, when I can invest 10 units of effort, I can actually get those deals to close. So because I'm spread across 14 opportunities here, I can actually get to close 3 opportunities. The rest are probably not that well qualified. I maybe don't have the time or energy to actually deal with them. Some of them might actually be well qualified, but I'm just not giving them enough attention in a reasonable time frame for them to actually progress, because time does kill deals. But if I was more focused, then maybe I only have 8 opportunities, and I've got the same amount of time available. So those bars, those blue bars, they both add up to 100. If you were to add the 14 bars on the left or the 8 bars on the right, they both accumulate to 100 units of measure. But as you see, because I've got less opportunities to work on the right-hand side, I'm actually closing 6 deals. I'm actually able to deliver as much work as required to close those. So I'm closing 3 times as much opportunity, twice as much opportunity, sorry, but actually working almost half as much of opportunities. And that's the thing to be aware about. If you actually focus better, you'll probably close more. And if you think about the effort I'm spending, then what I've got here is the green bar there is actually the you could say the productive effort. Everything to the sides, left and right, are things I'm working on, but they don't close. They don't get to the bottom of that pipe. So that it's wasted effort activity. If you compare the sides of the two, you should see that on the right hand side, there's far less wastage. Ideally, actually, we want nothing to go into the pipeline that doesn't actually close. The more we put in there that is actually not going to close, it's harder to find the ones that are going to close and harder to put the effort into it. So we actually make things worse, not better. So looking at the process a bit more, and processes are processes. My recommendation is to understand what your process is. Have probably 5 to 7 steps. It doesn't really matter what you call them. The key thing is be very clear about what happens in each step and what is the exit criteria. When do you know you have finished that activity and you can move on to the next stage in the process? Those are the key things. Most people often get very confused. They have very poorly defined exit criteria, so they don't know if they've actually finished that process. What often happens is they go mechanically through the process, but the customer's not with them because the customer has their own buying process. And on the buying process, it's quite different. The selling process is really just a proxy to mirror what the customer goes through, because the only thing that matters is what the customer thinks and what the customer does. What we're trying to do with the sales process is to help encourage the customer to move through their process, their decision-making process, as quickly as possible. And so the key things is to understand where is the customer in their thinking, what are they doing now, what decisions do they have to make, who do I need to speak to, what conversations do I need to have, and when do I know they've actually moved into a more detailed stage of investigation, quote, or buying activity. So again, we need to really understand the customer's buying process. We need to understand who to talk to. We need to understand the steps they take through to get to the point where they are convinced that they have a problem that is worth solving and you have a solution that will work for them, and the risk of implementing that solution is manageable. So talked about 2 processes. You've got the sales stage and the buying stages. Which one is the most important? Which one really matters? As hopefully you've understood, it's the buying process that matters. The sales process just helps us to mirror and manage and encourage the customer to move through their buying process. But as we saw earlier, things can change. People can come and go. External factors can come into play. So we may actually we may actually get to a point where the customer is pretty much convinced to make a purchase, and then maybe a merger and acquisition activity comes along, and the whole thing gets halted. And we have to start again, potentially maybe some months later when the M&A activity has concluded, or a key sponsor leaves the company, and we have to find another sponsor to help us work through their buying process. So it's really important to be constantly qualifying and checking and confirming things are what you think they are, and making sure that the information you have is correct and up to date, and also that the information you're receiving is correct. When you, particularly in a larger organization, it's very common that you'll get very different views from different people about actually what is happening and what the need is. You have to sort of triangulate that and work out what's really going on in that organization. This is a bit of an eye chart. I don't expect you to be able to read it. I believe the slides are available, but this is a sort of suggestion of the type of things that would happen in each of the sales stages that I spoke of. This is a sales process. There are many out there. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. The key thing is to have one, to understand it, so that when you talk to your salespeople, you all have the same understanding. So when someone says the opportunity is qualified and we're now proposing, you know exactly what that means, and everybody knows that means, and we're all talking the same language. One of the problems we find in sales is that everybody has a slightly different view of what's going on and understanding, and so we don't have a consistency, and it's very hard to make decisions based on that, and it's very hard to forecast, and we get surprises, particularly at the executive level. So what I've got here is a suggested series of stages. I've got a description of the activities in each stage. I've got the key thing I've got a definition of the evidences that we need to know that we are in this stage, and what it is that we need to understand that we have completed that stage. And importantly, I believe, is to allow the customer to be comfortable with what's going on, is to give them control and have a conversation about, do we continue this process? Do we stop this process? If you're going to stop the process, it's best to stop it as early as possible. You don't want to be stopping the process at the very last stage when the customer gets cold feet, because they were never really convinced that this was the right thing for them, but they went along with it because of maybe high-pressured selling. High-pressure selling in business doesn't really get you anywhere. It just means you waste more time trying to get something to happen that's never going to happen in the first place. So having real clarity about this and being able to have a constructive conversation about, okay, we're doing this now, how do we get to the next stage, will help you make the selling activity much more productive and efficient. Talked about sales skills. As well as obviously the process, we need to look at how we improve sales skills. And first thing I think to understand is that with your sales force, we need to help them spend the time on the right things. Putting pressure on sellers to just chase anything and everything that moves actually is counterproductive, because they will spend less time on the well-qualified opportunities. We need to help people understand how to sell and what are the key activities they need to be performing, and help them perform as well as they can. Education is key. A lot of salespeople, a lot of situations, we don't really spend enough time to understand the business problem that we're solving for the customer. We push product, we push services without really understanding. If somebody comes into a high street shop and says, I want a drill, they don't actually want to drill. They want to make holes. They want to create holes. So the conversation we should be having is, what sort of hole do you want to actually acquire? What is the purpose of that hole? What are you going to do with it? Is it to put something on the wall? Is it to dig something in the garden? We shouldn't just address the problem that is presented to us by the customer, because they may not fully understand the problem they need to solve. They will come to you with a solution that they've come up with, which may not be the optimal solution. And that's where good sales skills can really come in, is to help explore the problem and understand what is the problem a symptom of, and actually solve that symptom. So does the customer really understand their problem, and are they actually asking for fixes to a symptom rather than the problem itself? That is where you can have a lot of value-added selling, and that's where a lot of selling lets itself down, because we don't spend enough time understanding the customer situation and helping them understand their own situation. And then if they do have a problem, why should they change? Is the problem big enough? Is it actually something that is it a nice to have, or is it something that's really significant and they do really need to address it, or an opportunity they need to meet? Just how big is this issue, and how important is it to them individually and to the company? And what is the risk of the change? If any solution is effectively a type of change, you need to learn new skills. It needs to be integrated into the rest of the business. Something needs to change. Is the risk of that change going wrong sufficiently low to justify the investment? And is the outcome of that investment sufficiently high to justify all the disruption? So you may have a problem, but the customer may decide it's fine, we'll live with it, it's not worth the effort. Or maybe not worth the effort now, I've got too many other things on my plate, but we'll look at it later. So there's a deferred qualification, come back to it and agree. Let's pick up these conversations in 3 months' time or 6 months' time. That's absolutely fine. When we are talking to prospects, we need to understand that it's about them and their situation. It's not about us and what we're trying to sell them. Companies buy outcomes, so they want something to be fixed. The fact that you can fix it is interesting to them, but they're not buying. They say they're not buying a drill; they're buying the holes they want to make with the drill. If we talk about the holes, then that's a much more value-added conversation than talking about the drills. We may get very excited by our drill and say it's got a keyless chuck and it's got an integrated gearbox and it's got a lifetime guarantee. It doesn't actually help the customer understand how they're going to make a hole. So it's very much understanding the conversation and helping our sellers have the right conversation, which is about the customer and their situation and being relevant to them. Too many salespeople start trying to sell as soon as the customer has expressed any sort of need. And generally that process, it happens too quickly and the seller then starts pushing back and raising objections. They're not ready to buy. They still want to understand their problem. And as I said, companies buy outcomes. They're buying the result of the investment. They're not really buying the investment itself. So let's focus on the outcome. Let's focus on the impact of the solution that we provide them and how it will improve their business. And then we can talk about the solution once they say, you know what, that outcome that you're talking about is perfect. That's exactly what I want to achieve. Now, how do I achieve it? That's when you can start selling what you have to offer, not before. So a lot of that is about insights, it's about value, it's about new knowledge, it's about new understandings that you provide to your customer. If you can provide that, you'll be in control. You'll help the customer move through their decision-making process quickly, and you're most likely to increase the value of the investment because now they fully understand how it will impact their business. They're comfortable with that investment and they're likely to make a bigger investment. The reason why a lot of our sales are small is that people put their toe in the water. They're not quite sure. They're not quite convinced. It sounds okay, but let's just try it out first, which means that you have to go back and sell more potentially. Because you haven't done a great job in actually helping them understand how it's going to impact their business from day one. So they take a tentative investment rather than a bigger investment. And the other thing to bear in mind is in any organization, pretty much these days, decision making is not down to one person. We sometimes get very focused on talking to one person who we believe is going to make everything happen. And that's rarely the case these days. It's certainly not the case in any sort of large enterprise, and it's generally not the case even in smaller companies. You might have a chief exec, but they will probably check with their technical people and their procurement people, etc., just to make sure that everything makes sense. So there's a committee involved. It might be informal, it might be formal. And those committees, those group of people that have to have consensus is growing all the time. Research was done 5 or 6 years ago, said in the enterprise space, the average decision-making committee was 5.8 people. Last year, when the research was repeated, it was over 8 people. More and more people are getting involved in decisions because people are more risk averse and they want to have the ownership of the decision spread across many people as possible so that not one person is responsible. It's not me, it's us. So you can't blame me if we made a bad investment decision. And that's something to be very aware of. You need to be selling to all these people, and a lot of them you won't even know who they are. So how do you get the messages to these people that are part of this key decision-making process when you're not even sure they are? The first thing to do is to understand that there are people behind the scenes and understand how you communicate with those and how you uncover who they are so that you can give them messages that make them feel comfortable in order to support the recommendation of somebody to invest in your product or service. So we talked about thinking about the customer. My recommendation is to make sure that your sellers are always thinking about the customer situation, always trying to put themselves in the shoes of the customer. What is your customer actually buying from you? They say they're buying an outcome. So focus on the outcome, the impact of successfully deploying the product or the service that you are offering to them. What is that problem that they are solving? What is the business problem? So not the symptom that they talk to you about, but helping them understand what the real issue is that is actually causing that symptom to arise. If you can get that problem to be a core business driver, which is basically more revenue, less cost, or some sort of compliance or regulatory conformance, that is perfect, because then that would be something that the board and the most senior stakeholders will care about. But we need to understand what is the value of them solving that problem. How does it impact their business? How does it improve the business? And what does it change? What changes for them? We often overlook that there's often significant disruption to maybe skills that people have to acquire, to how they do things. Those things need to be addressed and explained, because if people are not sure and quite understand how those changes work for them, they may actually defer and decide not to invest because they're not sure. Your solution sounds great, but they don't understand the full impact to their business. And clearly, as I said, risks are really a major inhibitor. So we need to understand the risks that won't be perceived by the customer, address them and resolve them to make the customer comfortable that these risks are something that are manageable, understood, and really are not going to be a key problem for them moving forward. That last sentence also, just to make a point, people often chase customers who are doing very well. I would argue that actually it's companies that are not doing well, that are struggling, that are more likely to actually invest because they're in crisis and they need to do something to fix it. Customers doing very well often are saying, happy state, we don't need to do any more, we don't need to spend more money, we're doing great as it is. Why do we need to actually invest more to solve a problem we don't have? We're doing great, thank you very much. So think about, the trajectory of your customer, and are they struggling or are they actually doing very well? Because struggling ones might be a better bet for you. But then it comes back to your ideal customer profile. Is the financial health of the customer part of your ideal customer profile? It should be. Getting the customers buy-in. So it's important that they understand what they're going to get, understand the results that they will see, and it's important to understand why and how they decide. So, as a customer, I'm thinking to my supplier, do they understand my situation? Do they understand what my business does? Because if they don't, how can they sell to me? And I think a lot of salespeople don't have the skills or the patience to really understand the customer situation and talk about things in the customer language. We often talk in our own technical language that the customer doesn't really fully understand. But it's very important to use the customer's language and talk about things from their perspective. Does your solution make sense? Is it believable? Are the risks well managed? From a customer's perspective, ask them, does what I say make sense? Do you think it's reasonable? What risks do you see? What risks that concern you? If you're in proposal activity, then there are certain things to think about, which is, do you have a technical fit? Because if you don't have a technical fit, then your proposal, your RFP may be rejected. But have you aligned the business benefits to their business case? They will have a business case for investment. Are you aligned to that? Are you using the same sort of language that they use to justify purchases? If there's a team of you involved in selling, do you have a good match? Are you comfortable? Are they comfortable with you? Are the individuals you're putting in front of them the right sort of individuals? If you're selling to a group of people that let's say that the buying committee is all female, is your sales team all male? Is that a smart thing to do? Cultural fit. Do people feel comfortable working with you, buying from you? Because those are big determinators of whether they will go ahead or whether they will go with somebody else. Often in bids, we spend a lot of time working on technical fit, but actually it's more important, or as important, to work on the business fit. So are you solving the business problem? If the business problem is solved, the technical fit, you can get away with not being perfect technical fit. They'll work around that because the business impact is so significant that they'll adjust things to make sure that they can actually achieve that business fit. So my last slide is really talk about the idea of marginal gains. Selling it helps if you can improve several areas in a small amount, mainly because it's much easier to make a small amount and make it stick, and a small improvement and make it fix, than trying to fix one thing dramatically. It's very hard for people to take those things on board. So the idea here is to improve your process a bit, improve your skills a bit, and that way you will actually get your deals will get bigger and they will close more quickly. So you wonder what the TBR is about, and we'll come on to that with the reveal in a second. But if I was to reduce my average sales cycle time by 10%, so that it went down from, say, 10 months to 9 months, and I can increase the average transaction by 10%, then actually in the same period, I'll get 22% more revenue. So I've done two small improvements, and I've got a fairly significant improvement in the result. And that's something to focus on. How do I increase the average deal size? How do I reduce the amount of time it takes me to sell? And a lot of this is about qualification. The better qualified deals will close faster and for more. So I used to have a TVR. It was great fun. I used to drive around the place, and I think it provides a nice little acronym, which is, if I can improve the time taken to complete a sale, if I can increase the value of that sale, then I can dramatically improve the revenue that I acquire over time, and that will be a big impact on your cost of sale, because remember, this is about working with the same amount of sales resource you've got, and it's helping them move from having 60% of their opportunity end up in no decision to possibly 30% of their opportunity in no decision. So for the same resource, I've made them twice as productive, and that is achievable with the right focus on these elements of selling. So that's all I've got to say. There's quite a lot there. There's a lot more into sales, but I think if you can focus on just improving your process a little bit, improving your skills a little bit, and making sure you understand what a good customer looks like, you can have quite a significant impact on your sales effectiveness. That was my last slide. Nikki, I'll hand over to you, and if you've got any questions, I'll be very happy to take them.
Thanks, Guy. That was great. Some really simple but important messages in there. I mean, the ones that I personally have been reminded of is the qualification process and the importance of that. And it's really easy, particularly I think as now when times are a little difficult, to just get your head down, work harder, work longer. But actually, you've reminded me to take a step back, look at how we're qualifying things, invest that time wisely rather than just trying to get more into the top of the funnel. So that's incredibly helpful and a takeaway. And the other thing that I really liked, and you often forget as well, is painting that picture of your perfect customer. So, if there was one picture you had in your office or on your home screen on your laptop, if you work at home, it's what does that perfect customer look like, just to keep you on track, because it is so easy to get diverted. And again, just drawing it back into the context of the here and now, particularly when the world seems to have got even more competitive as people's spending is reducing, and as even, whether that's from a consumer perspective or a business perspective, spending is getting a little tighter and it gets more competitive. You can get distracted, almost a bit panicky about who to go for as customers. So again, I think that's a really helpful tip to keep you on track, and some great stuff there in terms of ideas and pointers around qualification methodologies and so on. So I've got a question, if it's okay, Guy, actually, and then I'll just have a wee look and see if we've got any from the audience. What is the most common way in which small businesses can improve their sales? What do they often miss or not spot?
I think what I see a lot of SMEs is a common trip is that they focus very much on the product and what they're selling. Don't spend enough time to really understand and talk to the customer about their situation. And it becomes very much a push, which is like pushing a stone uphill. And in fact, if a good salesperson, what happens is the customer converts into a buyer. They want to buy. That's what good selling is about. It's helping the customer get to a situation where they feel, you know what, I need this. When can I have it? As opposed to sellers pushing. It tends to be that we don't spend enough time talking to the customer about their situation before we switch on the let me sell you something mode. It's a sales skills thing. And I think that one of the problems with SMEs is they don't, a lot of them can't afford the sales enablement, sales operations functions that the big guys can. And so that nurturing and development of your sales talent is very difficult. And I would certainly encourage them to take advantage of anything that is available to externally for the government, whatever, to like the apprenticeship programs to develop their sales talent, because it's the biggest problem that we see in with SMEs is sales skills. I'm struggling to sell our stuff, and it's often they don't know where to start. You see a lot of...
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I mean, what we often see is people who set the business up are often the kind of technical experts, aren't they? They have that passion and belief for the product, they've designed it, they've made it, but that doesn't necessarily make them great salespeople. So we were chatting earlier, and just tell us a little bit more about how you can use apprenticeships from a sales resource perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just on the, I call that person the super salesperson, because actually the founder and the owner, they have the passion, they have the vision, and they are super enthusiastic about the product, but also they have that unique position of being the company. So people, when they're investing, they're actually also investing in that person individually, and they know the top person. And that problem is that person is almost doing it intuitively. They find it very hard to explain what they do. And in fact, they're in a unique position, so nobody else can do what they do because they are the head of the company. And so they can't develop people. They don't know what is to hire a good person. So that whole thing struggles. So one way to improve that is to, when you hire people, is to put them on like the sales apprenticeships that the government provides. Those are typically about 14 months. But the great thing about them is you get a structured introduction and education on business sales. So instead of you having the burden of training these people and explaining to them how to do sales, somebody else is doing that for you. And they apply that. They do that. That's 1 day a week. And the other 4 days, they're actually applying what they learn. So they're actually being productive. And people may argue, well, I can't afford someone to be only working on my business 80% of the time. But you'll be amazed how quickly they become more effective and more productive than somebody who's learning on the fly without any formal instruction. Because how the hell do you get better if you don't know what you're doing? How do you trial and error is not a very good mechanism to improve, particularly when we're in a lot of pressure to performance. So I would certainly encourage people to look at the sales apprenticeship level 4, which is like a first-year foundation degree level, is a good entry point. And if you are a small employer with less than 3 million wage bill, then you only pay 5% of the cost. So it's costing you 300 quid to get somebody professionally trained with a qualification that is recognisable by the government.
Brilliant. That's a great tip, and something that pretty much most, if not all, businesses could go away and take action on here and now. Great stuff. We've got a couple of comments here. One about loving the myth-busting light bulb moment and not just putting more in the top of the funnel. So it sounds like some of those things have hit the spot. So listen, thanks again, Guy. I know you've given up your time as part of the UMI Cost of Trading campaign. Really appreciate it. For everybody else, just in terms of next steps then, we have, don't forget to sign up to the UMI SatNav service. You'll get 3 months of that free of charge, and you'll be able to download the slides, etc. as a result. You will also be able to develop a personalised action plan. The link is to that is in the registration. In terms of, if you just want to have a chat with somebody, then pick up the phone. That's okay. UMI advisors are at the end of the phone on a web chat. You can hook up with them via social media. So you might just want to sort of sound them out for a few minutes first, and that's okay. Just get in touch as and when it suits you. But there's more to come in the series of webinars, so do keep an eye on that. You'll get some notifications through if you sign up to the SatNav platform. You won't have to remember. We'll send you a notification of when the next one's coming up and what the subject is. So I really look forward to hopefully seeing you again on the next webinar. Thanks again, Guy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.